No, no sunflower. No, that's too much work.
Well, friends, why don't we go ahead and get started? If you would mute yourself now, that would be great, and then there'll be time for conversation as the study continues. This morning, our teacher is the Reverend Bruce Puckett. He's an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene. He's been part of the chapel staff since 2012, and prior to joining the chapel staff, he served the congregation at Duke Chapel as my predecessor as the interim pastor for 2 years. So he loves us. Yay! And is favorably biased towards the congregation, and we appreciate our relationship with him and his leadership in the chapel. He's worked at the chapel, some of you may know, as the director of community ministry, then director of worship and community ministry, and now as the assistant dean. He's a contributing editor to A Plain Account, an online Wesleyan lectionary resource for preaching and study. And soon he'll be contributing to a commentary series titled Connections, a lectionary commentary for preaching and worship. So we're grateful that Bruce has agreed to lead our study today, and grateful for you all who are continuing to participate in this study. It is a joy. So thank you for your presence today. Let's begin with a word of prayer. I'm going to use a verse from Psalm 86. Let us pray. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart to revere your name. Amen. Amen. Bruce, it's yours.
Great. Well, good to see you all. Glad to know the faces behind the screen. One of the things I've really appreciated about having these Zoom calls is that people's names are on their pictures, and that is a real gift, because one thing we don't do very often at the chapel, especially outside of Sunday school rooms, is learn one another's names. And so though I've been at the chapel for more than 10 years now, I might not have learned some of your names ever. So it's a good time to have names and faces in front of me. So this morning I want to begin with how Pastor Carol began last week, inviting us to break into small groups and share your name. So just continuing with the getting to know one another thing. Also, I liked the option of knowing where you are this morning as you're watching. To gather together means such a different thing these days, and so knowing how many miles we've crossed in order to gather together is nice. And then the third thing, last week Pastor Carol asked you to say how you are feeling prosperous, or how you're prosperous, something to that effect. And this week, I'm going to take the opposite. And I would like you to share one way that you feel needy today, or one thing you need. Now, it can be simple. Maybe you need a drink of water, or maybe you didn't get breakfast yet and you need some food. Or maybe it's something more you want to share as a way of feeling in need today. But I invite you to share one way that you feel needy this morning. So Pastor Carol, if you could send us to our groups.
I will. I'm working on it. Why is it not going the way I want it to go? I'm sorry, friends. Why? Oh. There we go. Good morning, Robin and Ina.
Hey, Carol, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too.
So you know how sometimes breakout rooms and the technology works just the way it wants to, and now it's not quite, but that's all right. So because I was, sorry, I'm distracted by this.
Go
Anyway,
ahead, do what you need to do.
I'm good. So where are you calling from? I'm in the office, in the middle of in the church office at the table. Where are you today?
Oh, I'm at home.
Good.
I'm at home, doing well. I hope you are.
Yeah, doing well. So what way are you feeling needy today?
Where am I feeling needy today?
Yeah, Bruce's question.
Oh, I'm just joining now for the first time, so you'll have to tell me what the question was.
He asked us to do 3 things. We're supposed to, we're in small groups for like 3 minutes. So he asked us to give our name, our location, and in what way we are needy. But you know what? I think, hold on, I need to check my phone. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay. All right, we're closing the rooms, and so yeah, that was the question. In what ways were we feeling a need for something this morning?
Can everyone hear me?
You're back in the main room, I believe.
I am, but I couldn't hear anyone in my small group, so I apologize.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, this
I'm sorry, Leroy.
this Zoom thing is still a challenge. Okay, there we go, I think.
Friends, I think that was my technical error, so I apologize for that.
That's all right. Thanks for doing the navigation of this for us today, Carol. This is it makes it easier on me. So, well, I want to spend just a few minutes this morning talking a little bit about Psalm 69, and then we're going to spend most of our time going in and out of breakout sessions together, reading the scriptures, talking together in small groups, and then coming back and kind of reporting out about the things we've seen and the things that we've heard in those texts. So I hope that you came this morning prepared to speak with one another and prepared to read together. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll use the chat function to send 2 links, links to the NRSV text of Psalm 69 and the NIV text of Psalm 69. And we'll be using both of those throughout our time together today. I've chosen these because they're enough different from one another that you can hear some interesting nuance in the text. And then also, we use the NRSV in our services on Sundays, and so I thought it would be good for us to use that as one of them, and then NIV as a counterpoint, kind of. So today, the kind of topic that I was given to speak about is the weak and strong, and how weakness and strength, or you can think maybe poverty and wealth, or neediness and power, how they show up in the Psalms, and specifically in Psalm 69. Last week, Pastor Carol talked about how the Psalms as a whole go from orientation to disorientation to reorientation through the whole Psalter, and Psalm 73 that she covered last week had that kind of in microcosm in the book, or the chapter itself. Our Psalm today, Psalm 69, is not that at all. It begins with disruption. Life is not good. It's a psalm of lament, and right away the psalm writer says, "God save me." So right away it's distress and challenge and hardship. And so we go from disorientation through a lot of disorientation to finally some, reorientation, the way Psalms of Lament often do. Just as a reminder, the Psalter is broken into kind of 5 sections or 5 books, and this is near the end of the second book. So the second book ends in 72. This is Psalm 69. 69, 70, and 71 are all Psalms of Lament, leading into a psalm about of prayers for the king in Psalm 72, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I want to just point out a few characteristics of lament psalms. So this Psalm 69 is a psalm of lament. It's an individual lament. There are more than 40 individual laments throughout the psalms, which make it the most frequent type of psalm. And so you'll find them all over the place, which means the writers of the psalm were not afraid to bring their problems to God. So if you feel like most of the time when you're praying, you're just complaining to God, well, you're in good company. So the Bible kind of gives you the freedom to do that. Hopefully we'll find ways to make prayers other than just our needs or complaints or petitions. But again, we're in good company if we don't. So, yeah, so just a few characteristics that you can watch for in lament psalms. They don't fall in any particular order necessarily, but you find many of these throughout the individual laments. They often begin with an address to God of some sort, then a description of the suffering that the psalmist is experiencing and that they want to be relieved. Then from there, they'll ask God for help in some ways, that God will relieve or save or rescue. You'll see all those things in our psalm today. Then there is typically a cursing of the enemies, and almost always the psalmist blames his or her enemies for the position that the psalmist finds himself in. And so you get this kind of sense of lifting up the one who's done the wrong that caused it. Now, occasionally you'll also have a confession as part of these Psalms of Lament, recognizing the psalmist's own faults in it. Maybe it's the psalmist's fault that he or she is in the position that they're in. So then typically from this, you'll also have an expression that God is going to provide, that God is able to deliver the psalmist, that these needs that have been expressed will actually be attended to, that God will listen. And if that is the case, then the psalmist nearly always says, if you deliver me, I promise to thank you for it. I will praise you in some way. This is kind of the deal I'll make with you, God. If you deliver me, I'll give you my praise and thanksgiving. And then nearly every time, there's only a few exceptions in the Psalms, nearly every time it moves from that promise to praise to an actual praise, to an actual song of thanksgiving in some way. So it's like the psalmist is already making good on his promise, just in case he forgets that he made the promise later on. Yeah, so more to Psalm 69 in particular, you'll find that many people who are reading Psalm 69, and maybe if you read before you joined us today, you found yourself hearing resonance of Psalm 22, that famous psalm that Jesus quotes on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? Also a lament psalm that surprisingly ends in praise, kind of from the depths to praise in the end. And this psalm takes a similar trajectory. There's not much good to be spoken of. There's not much good in the psalmist's life. There's a lot of enemies causing problems. And then out of the blue, praise to God. Happens similarly in Psalm 22. And so a lot of times when people are reading Psalm 69, they'll also think of Psalm 22. Another thing to note about Psalm 69 is it is regularly used throughout the New Testament, especially in the Gospel of John. Maybe as you read today, you'll hear some of those resonance, and I'll even encourage you to be listening for that. But things like zeal for your house will consume me from John 2:17, and they hated me without cause from John 15:25, and there are others as well. But just be listening for things that you hear from the scriptures as you're listening to Psalm 69, because apparently the church has liked to read this, even the early church, so much so that they decided to include it in the writings of the New Testament scriptures. two last points I'll make about this. When thinking about poverty and strength throughout the Psalms, there is regularly, as discussed last week, this kind of questioning of why the wicked prosper. But rarely are the wicked, even though they're in a position of power, the ones who are considered to have the ultimate strength. In fact, it's always God who has the ultimate strength. And so God is the one who, in God's steadfast love and faithfulness, God's hesed, is the one who will show up and make redemption happen, and has the power to do so. So again, like I said, classic of Lament Psalms, there's this kind of expression of faith and confidence that God is strong enough, God is powerful enough, God is capable of fixing the problem. So in the psalmist's mindset, in many of the psalm writers' mindset, because it's written by many people, God is the one with the ultimate power and authority. And therefore, when thinking of our own neediness and our own poverty, we don't just look to a human resource, but we look to God more broadly. And the psalmists are doing that over and over. And so throughout the Psalms, you get a constant reference and refrain of God's loving kindness, God's steadfast love, God's hesed, comes up over and over again throughout the Psalms, and it will show up today in our Psalm. The other thing I'll say is this: throughout the Psalms, we hear over and over God's concern for the poor or the needy. And regularly throughout the Psalms, the word for poor is, I think it's Anawin. I forgot to write it down, so I'm not remembering the exact Hebrew word. But it's a word that talks about material poverty. So it's talking about real life neediness. Of course, spiritual neediness is a real life neediness too, but the psalmist is regularly talking about things that are touching me physically or harming me in harming my actual person, as well as things like needing food and water and sustenance and life and breath. So you can watch and kind of pay attention to this sense of need that is very physical, and a God who is concerned about people who need things physically. So God doesn't pretend like we're not human, and the psalmists don't pretend like we're not human either. So it's important to hear that and recognize that. Psalm 69, 32, and 33, which is part of our psalm today, you'll hear this reference to, sorry, I'm gonna actually just open my Bible because it feels easier to do. So in this psalm, you hear it this way: let the oppressed see it and be glad. You who seek God, let your hearts revive. For the Lord hears the needy and does not despise his own that are in bonds. This is just one. You could read Psalm 9:18, which early in the Psalm study, if you're listening to our worship services, I preached on that Psalm, and Psalm 9:18 says, "For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever." Or again, Psalm 35:10 says, "All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you, delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from him who robs him." And then, like I said, Psalm 72 concludes this book. And in Psalm 72, we hear about, it's talking about prayers for a king. And the good king is the king who cares for and delivers the needy or the poor, has the poor kind of at heart. And the reason this is the good king is because this king's heart is mirroring God's heart. This king is being godlike in that. And so we come through these laments to look toward a king who is going to care for the most needy and for the poor. All right. So I rushed through that. Sorry about that. But there's a lot I want to do today, and I want you all to talk to each other. So if you want my notes, I can send them to Pastor Carol, or you can email me and I'll send them to you so that you can have them too. I'll probably clean them up a little because, they're my notes. But so what we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so doing is going through sections of the scripture passage in small groups. And so I'm going to give you a few instructions and a couple of questions, and then I'll include in the chat some opportunities. Hopefully everybody will be able to see my chat message but give you some opportunities to look into or to hear the questions or see them written. So when you get into your group, I need you to choose 2 people who will read and 1 person who will be the spokesperson when they get out of the group. So 2 people who will read, 1 person to be a spokesperson. Got that? Everybody shake your heads or give me the little thumbs up reaction on your, all right, good. All right. The reason 2 people, because we're going to read the passage from the NRSV, and then again, right after it, the passage from the NIV. So I'll put those in the link right before we go to our groups. So NRSV and then NIV. As you're listening to those, I want you to pay attention. I want you to ask 2 questions primarily. I want you to ask the question of, what does this section say about who God is, where God is, or what is expected of God? So we're thinking about God first in these. It's a little bit potentially odd because this psalm is very much about people. It's very much about the person who's struggling. But I want you to ask the question, where is God? What's God doing? What's God expected to be doing? Yeah, so that's the first question. The second question I want you to ask is, what does this section say about the one who is in need? What do you hear the section saying about the one who is in need? So first about God and then about the one who's in need. Some just useful tips. This is good anytime you're reading the Bible and you want to like kind of dig in and study and think about the scriptures. Read in multiple versions. Unless you happen to know Greek or Hebrew, this is a great way to understand or see the translation decisions people are making. So I'm going to have you read it in multiple languages, or I mean in multiple translations. As you're doing that, I want you to think about, what are the differences you hear? What are the differences you hear in the passages? Why maybe are the translators making those decisions? Some of them like to do more literal translations. Some like to make more figurative translations. But as you're hearing them, what does that difference create in your mind? What is it that you notice because of it? The next thing I want you to think about is, what are the words or phrases or images that the psalm writer uses? This is important because the Psalms are vivid, imaginative, creative, sometimes hyperbolic in their language. And so hearing and paying close attention to those sorts of things, to the words and the language that the writer is using, will help you get a deeper sense, maybe even get the feeling of what is being said in a deeper way. So pay attention to what words or phrases or images are being used. And feel free to lift those up as you're talking about what you're hearing about God and what you're hearing about the person in need. And then the last section, or the last thing that I would just encourage you to listen to for, is what kinds of things are repeated. Sometimes the psalmist uses repetition right away. It'll say one thing and then just rephrase it barely a little bit. It happens all throughout the psalm, just to make the point a little bit deeper. So, but you can maybe see like what's happening by this repetition, or by this, by going deeper into this questioning, or this calling out of who God is, or challenging, or asking for an answer. So if you keep those things in mind as you're talking, I think you'll see some fruitful things. I think you'll have a fruitful conversation. At the end, when we come back, I'll give you instructions about what I want you to share, but you should plan, if you're the spokesperson, you should plan to share 2 things from your group. So 2 things that stood out to you. You're gonna have a very short amount of time, but you should plan to have 2 things. All right, before we go, I'm gonna grab these 2 links for the NRSV, and I'll drop them in the chat. Here's one. And then, so you'll want to click on those, and hopefully they'll open your browser in 2 different windows, and then you'll have, I should have put a space between them so it was easier to see, but then you'll have them and you can follow along as the person who gets assigned to read reads. All right, any questions? If you have a quick question, it might be useful for the group, so you can unmute and ask it. All right, if not.
I'd like to capture what you said in the chat, just so we.
Yeah, sure. I can.
Can you see it? Did I get?
Yeah, it looks like you got it. It looks like you got it well. I will also put this. Yeah. So what is section? There's a an additional thing. I added a fifth one that I didn't say to you guys, but you can think about that one too. But that's there's the
How much time?
Thank you.
you're gonna have 10 minutes. Did I say 10 minutes, Carol?
You said 8.
8 minutes. Okay, we're gonna have 8 minutes. And oh yes, I need to tell you what the first section is. You're gonna read verses 1 through 6. 1 through 6 for the first time. Okay, that's important. 1 through.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
All right, send us away. All right. So I'm assuming that every group was as eager as mine to have someone be the speaker. So I'm going to invite you now, to whoever you assign to be your speaker, maybe to share two things that came up in this. It can be about God. It can be about the psalmist. It can be about an image that was striking to you all, or that you noticed was important in the early psalm. We'll have just a few minutes here. So
I find it's easiest to go first when, so that I don't have to not repeat what anybody else said. So I will go first here. A couple things we noticed. In terms of who is in need, there's very much this individual with this very striking language is in need. But we also found it interesting that for a moment in verse 6 here, they're looking beyond that to a separate group that also might be in need because of this individual. This phrase, "Do not let those who seek you be dishonored because of me." We don't want others to lose faith in God because of what this individual has done, and that seems rather distinctive in this psalm. And then the phrase that stuck out to more than one of us was in verse 4 at the very end. "What I did not steal, must I now restore?" And it's a very particular type of injustice, which felt like it was it felt very distinct as well. There's so many lament psalms. It's sort of interested in what makes this distinct from others.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Craig.
Well, I will go second, and I was in group 4. And so a lot of the things that Craig mentioned, we also saw. One of us noted that in verse 3, "My eyes fail while I wait for my God." That's one. I'm looking at another translation, but it's not just grow dim. This is a very vivid description of this person who is in big, big trouble. And then also we wondered about the same thing about having to pay back something you didn't steal, and also about the effect of whatever this sin is or whatever it is on other people. So we thought of those things as well.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Elaine.
Our group kind of really connected with just the deepness of the distress that the person was going through. Well, I guess David in theory, but also that sense of, I guess in verse 6, "Let not those who hope in thee," that hope, is often based on a sense of the promise of God, promises, and the sense of an awareness of who God is and how he's acted and his character and how he acts, but also then still tied to that is that sense of presence, of longing to connect with that again, and maybe the dance of doubt and faith, but still having hope in that sense of longing for that the promise of God to be manifest in how he's present with us. So that was what we discussed.
Good. Yeah, your group anticipated where the psalmist is going, where he said, holds that. That's good. Any other groups? So so you all hit on a lot of things that our group said. One thing I'll go ahead.
Okay, all right, group 5, all of these things we did, but one thing particularly, we said that in verse 2 where he's petitioning God, God has expectations of him also. That he's realizing that God expects him to be a good example. And God expects him to, he's petitioning God to be present with him at this point. And physically, he's talking about the things he has. He's in the mud. He's ashamed. He's very afraid of being destroyed by this injustice that Craig and talked about. So that was group 5.
Good. Yeah, so the one thing I'll lift up that our group discussed was that the writer believes that God is there. That this isn't somebody who says, God, where have you gone? But it seems like God isn't there enough, like, or isn't close enough to the situation yet, that to stop what's going on, or to deliver yet. But so God's not absent, but God maybe is just a little more distant than the psalmist wants. One thing I will point out is there is, and we'll get to it next, but there is a sense in the psalm writer's tone that he's defensive. I'm going to say he. I don't know if it's a he or she, but is defensive about being done wrong to without having done the wrong. So if you read verse 6 or 5 and 6 as oh God, you know my folly. So God, you know I didn't do this. Like, God, you know the wrongs I've done, and this isn't my fault. You can hear it that way. The line preceding it is, what I did not steal, must I now restore? God, you know what I've done wrong. It's not me, right? Like this, I don't have to restore something I didn't steal. It's not me. There are other times where the psalmist is way more ready to acknowledge their own sins or confess in a particular way. This is, save me from the wrong I've done. And even the next line that's about the community, are thinking about those who might be harmed because of the struggle that he's going through. It's not so much because he's done wrong, but more so because if you see somebody who's being punished or being harmed when they in fact have done no wrong, then you're more likely to think, well, is God just, or is God good, or what's going on here? So the psalmist is kind of using this as a like, maybe a dig on God a little, like, hey God, you've got a reputation to uphold here. If people see how bad it is for me, what are they going to think about you? So maybe listen with that in mind, as the psalmist is like saying, hang on for a second. Really, it's not me. And then we'll get on to the next thing. Okay, so for this next time, we're going to do 8 minutes again. And this time we're going to read from 7 to 18. So it's a little bit longer of a passage, 7 to 18. Go ahead and break us into our sections. All right, let's jump right in. Time goes so quickly. You know, we could like make these Bible studies 2 hours, but then we'd skip church, so we can't do that. Who wants to share?
Okay, I'll go first because I'll be fast.
Linda, you
All
go.
right.
Go ahead.
Regina,
Don't nobody speak at one
I'll,
time.
I'll speak for our group. We had, it was mentioned about a pivot point in about following after God, but still being able to trust him, even though there's lots of complaints from David, as he has written here, about I and what I need, but there's a pivot point of him still being able to trust and rely in God and having a bold conviction and a confidence in God and having a faith in the reputation that God and his steadfast love would be completed. And we have hope for the future.
okay. All right. And I was, most of all, we talked about the zeal in this. Sally read us, I don't know what version it was, one of these translations with paraphrased translations. And you could really feel that he felt awful. He was being unwanted by his family and blamed for everything else. And his passion here, that he was asking God to come and be present with him and to make him not have to go through these horrible things he was going through. So.
Good, thanks, Linda.
One of the couple things, we found that there's repetition from the first 6 verses about the deep waters sinking in the mire, letting the floodwaters sweep over. So that imagery coming in, and then we were struck by in verses 9 through 12 how there was quite a bit of detail about how this person is suffering because of the zeal for the Lord, all the way to the very depths of drunkards making songs about me, which we enjoyed very much. A philosopher among us did suggest that, wondering whether is this person making so much complaint that God sort of gets tired of this person, is letting him just hang out a little bit longer. But
that's funny.
Okay, ditto to whatever Craig said. We we had some of the same thoughts. We noticed the drunkards part too, but we also noticed that someone wondered if he had been apart from, maybe he was apart from people he loved. Maybe he was a leper, who knows? It's hard to know, but we noticed the intensity of his cry unto God. I think that's the main thing that comes across, is he has faith in God, he's really trusting God to do something.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the intensity, that's a great word. I think that I said hyperbolic earlier, and I think that there is some maybe of that, but also when you're in the very worst kinds of places in your life and the hardest things, and you're feeling them all the way, it doesn't feel like hyperbole. It feels like the truth. And maybe it even is. Maybe it is this bad. To say that the drunkards are down there making songs up about me, that's like going about as far as you can imagine, really, right? There are some things I think in this that you just have to chuckle at. But you get the distress, you get the amount of pain that the psalmist is experiencing. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of things and then point us toward the next one, but we won't do the breakout session for the next one because we only have about 5 more minutes. So it's important to notice water imagery in this. Some people noted it, some people brought that up, but it's significant because at the end, first of all, waters were chaotic spaces in the imagination of the biblical writers, and so they need to be tamed. But God is the God and creator of the waters. So even those things that are not or that are destructive about the waters, God can overpower them. You see that even in Jesus being on the boat and calming the storms. Like that's such a powerful move by God, or by Jesus in that setting, because these waters, these chaotic things, he has the power to subdue. And so these waters are rising up to his neck, are creating death kind of opportunity, this thing that's coming, and the psalmist is crying out to God to tame the waters. And by the end of the psalm, verse 34 says, "Let heaven and earth praise him. Let the seas and everything that moves in them praise the Lord." So you get this like movement from the waters of this destructive, chaotic thing to God is going to be so good and so redemptive and such a rescuer that even the destructive things become something that praises God. And so just paying attention to that water imagery, you can hear the movement that happens in the psalmist. I'll also point out the way that that this is something that if you were listening and reading more carefully and had a much longer time, you would pick up on the way that the psalmist talks about being estranged from his family. And the language of redemption that's used in this passage, that asking God to redeem the people, is language that is about next of kin is supposed to do that kind of work. They're supposed to come when you are in debt. Your next of kin in biblical times were the one who would come and pay you out of that debt, would redeem you. And so what the psalmist is saying is, even my closest people, even my family, have left me behind. So I am turning to you, God. Be the next of kin to me. Be as close as a brother. Be as close as my father. Restore me, redeem me. And that kind of family imagery is so critical in this. You might not pick that up if you weren't maybe either reading a commentary or paying attention to words like redemption and knowing, hey, the thing of redeeming is a thing that a family member does. And God is always throughout the Bible being called on to be the redeemer. And that's a crucial kind of thing. As you look to the next thing, you get really deep into the psalmist saying, these enemies are causing me trouble. God, do something about it. God, you've got to be the actor. Disrupt their plans. They are when you punish somebody, which you're totally in the right to do, they're making those people feel even worse. That's not their job. You're the judge and punisher. They are not. So when they do that, that's bad news. You get that in the next section. And so the psalmist, just as so many lament psalms do, lifts them up and says, God, intervene, make it right. Stop these people from doing the bad that they're doing for me, and put them in their place. And then as I said, most of these psalms, and this one most lament psalms, but this one in particular, moves from this distress and a cry out against the enemies who are causing it into a moment of recognizing that God can and will redeem. And when God does, when God rescues, when God does the thing that the psalmist knows God can and will do, it will result in praise and joy and thanksgiving. And it's here where we get the reminder that just as the psalmist is needy, God is a God who looks on the needy and looks on the poor and cares for them and will redeem and rescue them. And so this praise comes because the psalmist remembers that just as he is needy, so too others who are needy, God redeems and rescues, and so he can count on it. He can count on that because God redeems and rescues the needy. The psalmist who is needy and poor in this situation can count on being rescued and redeemed. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot there. There's so much. This is such a great psalm. And maybe one of those days when you're just feeling terrible, it's the psalm you'll turn to and pray it. I mean, how can you go wrong with beginning a prayer, "Oh God, save me," right? So I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer, and then I need to go upstairs and do things like make sure the candles are lit, right? Somebody's got to do that. So I'll go make sure. And then when you guys are worshiping together today, you'll be like, yes, the candles are lit. It's so good. So this is a prayer from one of my favorite prayer books. It's called Guerrillas of Grace by Ted Loder. I recommend it a lot. You should buy this book and read the prayers in it. But here's one. It is called I Am in Need of What? Well, God, I made it through another sweet, sour time. And here I am, nibbled, frazzled, puzzled, awed, and in need of what? A chuckle, maybe? A revolution begun with a belly laugh? a Bronx cheer in the face of the onslaughts of disaster and death itself. Such is my need, and this is my wonder. Are you really as humorless, as grimly serious as I have made you out to be? Or do aardvarks and monkeys and bullfrogs and platypuses, puppies and porpoises and people, perhaps, reveal the comic side of your grace, the playful side of your love? Tickle me into giggling down the wailing walls of my endless grievances and trip up my waddling pomposities. Lord of laughter as of tears, shake me awake and teach me to laugh at myself, at my black-draped solemnity, over my petty preoccupation with success and failure, through all the hurt and adversity, until my laughter lures me deep, beneath the terrors without names, beneath the questions without answers, beneath the pain without relief, lures me deep to the love in me unused, to the strength unspent, to the courage untapped, to the dream unrisked, to the beauty unexpressed, all the way down to the inescapable bottom, to the awareness that I must get on with being who I am, as fully as I can, as unflinchingly as I can, as accurately as I can, which is to say, as gracefully, as powerfully, as faithfully as you created me to be. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce, for this time together. We appreciate it, and I'm grateful for your time. Blessings on the worship service, and I look forward to seeing each of you next week.
Bruce, before you go, what was the name of that prayer book? He's gone.
I'll find it, Kathy, and get it to you.
Gorillas
He
of
said
Grace.
Gorillas of Grace.
Yes.
Gorillas of Grace by Paul Loader, and it's terrific.
Yes, it is.
I still missed it. Just give it to me, Carol.